right, so for the benefit of the one person who doesn't know me, this is the Columbine Effect, how 5 teen pastimes got caught in the crossfire and why teens are taking them back. During his teenage years, David was miserable. He felt bored and powerless. He watched as his classmates turned to drugs, shoplifting, and other illegal activities to escape their boredom. Instead, he played video games, particularly horror games and first-person shooters, such as Diablo 2 and Counter-Strike. In video games, all players start out in the same place, level 1. Through hard work and hours of dedication, they rise through the ranks. Their characters become more capable and powerful. Sure, the challenges mount, but the practice has earned them plenty of skill. Through games, David's self-esteem flourished. In online games, he discovered that players didn't judge him by his appearance. They couldn't see what he looked like. Because so many online games are team-based, he was able to make friends and accomplish tasks with them. They shared victory as well as disappointment. However, during hard times, David disappeared into gaming. His grades suffered. "I stopped talking to friends who weren't gamers. My parents were mad as hell," he said. "They did everything they could to try to stop me, but I always found a way to game." His parents' efforts were not only fruitless, but they built a wall between David and his family. The gaming world became his only source of solace and support. Then one day he got a car, and things began to turn around. David could leave the house and go visit friends. Sure, he visited the friends with whom he played online games, but it was a chance to socialize face-to-face, rather than behind the screen. Things consistently improved from that point. I worked hard in college and loved it. Then I got jobs, and I enjoyed that even more, he said. Still, he loves and defends the games that provided him so much relief. "I always get angry when game addiction is blamed as the cause of suicide, divorce, and school violence, because I am certain that the game addiction is a reaction to misery, not the cause. It is possible that the gaming addiction ultimately makes the problem worse, but it's not the original cause. And people who choose to end their lives or attack others are more likely deeply disturbed in many aspects of their lives. Gaming may be their last retreat." Bonnie was a teenager when her mom told her she was evil and kicked her out of the house. It wasn't because Bonnie was misbehaving or mistreating her family or doing anything illegal. It was because she had discovered a new faith. Growing up, Bonnie's family was Catholic. They didn't attend church regularly, but her parents' beliefs informed the family's day-to-day lives. At first, her mom seemed open-minded about spirituality. She strongly believed in never forcing religion on anyone, including her daughter. "I believe that I am especially lucky for that, because it gave me time to realize and research religions in an open manner," she said. However, there were limits to that open-mindedness. When Bonnie discovered Wicca, a nature-based pagan religion that teaches members to do no harm, her mother balked. Tension mounted between them, and Bonnie's mother kicked her out more than once because they disagreed over issues of faith. Each time she was allowed to return. "I have nowhere else to go," she said. However, at home, her mother doesn't allow the most basic tools of Bonnie's religion, including books and pentacles. "It upsets me because I don't look down upon her beliefs," she said. Despite these tensions, Bonnie feels Wicca is the right path for her. She calls it "my true calling." It encapsulates the peace-loving feelings she has fostered her whole life. Wicca feels like coming home. Tara was 17 when she and her boyfriend, both longtime heavy metal fans, scored tickets to see Ozfest Heavy Metal Festival in Atlanta, a few hours away from her home in Tennessee. She told her mom where she was going, packed a bag, and traveled south to rock out. When she returned, with her long-haired boyfriend standing beside her, her mom told her to leave and not come back. The couple stayed with friends for as long as they could hold out, but Tara returned home when she ran out of options. Her mom let her in, but the two never discussed the incident or any of the tensions between them. That tension only fueled Tara's love of heavy metal music. Not that Tara, by the way. The words are very easy to decipher when you are a lost and angry teenager. Perseverance, not stepping down, dealing with love you can't have or have lost, she said. Tara's behavior got worse. She drank frequently and ran away from home several times, ultimately moving out during her senior year of high school. Before long, she had checked herself into rehab to try to clean up her life. I couldn't feel anything but anger and regret, she said. She got pregnant toward the end of her teens, giving birth to a baby girl. As a mom and metalhead, there are times she regrets that her mother didn't show more interest in her life, particularly her interest in the music that comforted her the most. You want your child to feel like you care, and a lot of times they express feelings of angst through music, she said. Teenager is a relatively new concept. Psychologist G. Stanley Hall recognized adolescence as a separate period of human development in 1904. But teenagers didn't really come into their own until the 50s, when the first baby boomers reached that precarious age. They were the first generation of teens to have cultural options to call their own, including rock and roll and comic books. With the rise of teenage culture came the rise of parental worrying over that culture. Many rock songs, particularly those performed by black artists, were blacklisted from radio stations. The United States Senate held hearings to explore the relationship between comic books and juvenile delinquency, a move that would be echoed by the Parents Music Resource Center 30 years later. Despite these roadblocks, comics and rock music became increasingly popular among 1950s teens, birthing the tension between parents and kids, now known as the generation gap. For each subsequent generation, teen culture has grown a little wilder, a little more transgressive. Music, films, books, and games explore ever darker topics. There are many reasons for this. For starters, society itself is increasingly complex, and teens are asked to face troubling topics from street violence to HIV at earlier and earlier ages. In addition, teens are always looking for something to set themselves apart from their parents, something that will shock and offend. If adolescence is about nothing else, it's about striking out on your own. It's about creating a self that is independent from parents and the culture that came before. Many teens do this either accidentally or intentionally by finding interests that surprise and anger their parents. And yet many adults seem to forget that they did these same things. They look at teens and wonder what's going on. Why is the music so loud? Why are the games so violent? Why are the songs so graphic? They think these influences can't possibly be safe or healthy, and so they clamp down. Newspapers link these influences to juvenile crimes without evidence, cementing adults' fears. And over time, adults not only mistrust these influences, they begin to mistrust teens themselves. In each of the stories that open this chapter, a teenager had found something, music, spirituality, gaming, that provided comfort, a lifeline, a way of connecting with him or herself, and at times connecting with like-minded peers. And in each case, adults acted in precisely the wrong way. Of course, the mistrust between teens and adults works both ways. Yes, teens go out of their way to hide their lives from their parents. They refuse to talk and they get surly when pressed. That's part of growing up. That means it's often up to parents to do the tough work of staying engaged, even when they're thwarted at every turn, and studying up on what their kids are doing. It's also up to parents to react with an open mind and not believe everything they read in the papers when their teen shows an interest in something offbeat. Our culture is rife with situations in which teens are publicly misrepresented with dire consequences. These stories have fueled the fears and misunderstandings that underlie many adult-teen relationships to this day. In March of 1987, 4 Bergenfield, New Jersey teenagers parked a Chevy Camaro in a vacant garage beneath the Foster Village apartments. The garage had recently become a hangout where local teens could drink, smoke pot, and listen to music without parents or police interfering. On this night, they closed the garage door, opened the windows, and left the car idling. 6 months after a drunken friend of theirs had plunged off a 200-foot cliff to his death, these teens made good on the suicide pact. Their deaths left locals wondering when the copycat suicides would begin, and eyeing local misfit teens, the burnouts, with unease. In Bergenfield, there seemed to be a fine line between adult concern and criminal suspicion. It didn't help that the teens in question had already written off older generations as uncaring adults who couldn't and wouldn't understand. When the suicides came, the burnouts dug in their heels, refusing to talk. Donna Gaines, author of Teenage Wasteland, spent months working essentially undercover with these kids, hoping to learn anything that might shed light on their culture. Kids who realize they are marginal fear reprisals, Gaines wrote. Like any other alienated youth since the conceptualization of youth as a social category, they don't like to talk to adults about anything. After the suicide pact, a few burnouts told reporters that they were reluctant to confide in school guidance counselors because the counselors might tell their parents and they'd be punished or even sent to a psychiatric hospital. That wasn't the only reason Bergenfield teens were reluctant to speak up. After the suicides, adolescents were encouraged to suppress their thoughts on day-to-day reality, Gaines wrote. Getting through the day for many of these kids meant disassociating from their feelings and sticking close with friends. Otherwise, they feared they might start believing adults' version of the truth. Like so many others, Bergenfield's youth sought refuge from this impossible situation in music. Ozzy Osbourne, Iron Maiden, Motley Crue. Some of them explored the occult or even called themselves Satanists, sometimes to scare or impress people. The teens who committed suicide were found next to an AC/DC album with song titles such as Hell Ain't a Bad Place to Be, Problem Child, and Rock and Roll Damnation. Some adults in Bergenfield came away with the idea that there were heavy metal-influenced cults among the town's teens. Because neither side opened up, parents remained in the dark, both before and after the suicides. The burnouts perceived adults as uncaring and clueless. One told Gaines, "Parents don't give a shit. They don't want to face problems until things blow up. And then when shit happens, they panic and they think you're nuts, but they still won't help you out." There are many adults who do care and who do the work necessary to connect with kids under just about any circumstance. Unfortunately, parents and adults who miss the mark are also pretty common. Recent history is filled with examples of this. By misunderstanding what teens are about, why they're behaving the way they do, and why they're listening to, reading and playing and exploring the things that they are, society has turned against some of its most vulnerable adolescents. In West Memphis, adults utterly failed to make sense of boys like Damien Eccles and Jason Baldwin. Damien was a misfit teen in the small Arkansas town. He lived in a 2-bedroom trailer with his mother, stepfather, grandmother, and sister. He grew up poor and abused. One social worker described his family's problems as severe. He also suffered from depression. At least one psychiatrist thought he might be bipolar. He dropped out of school and was a bit aimless, and had been accused of both threatening his ex-girlfriend and of forming a suicide pact with her. He developed a reputation among local teens, partly because he dressed so differently from them, wearing black clothes that he preferred. He hung out primarily with his friend Jason. Others didn't like us. They'd been accusing me of being a Satanist since the 6th grade. It was because I had long hair and wore concert t-shirts with bands like Metallica and Guns N' Roses, Ozzy Osbourne and U2, Jason said. Even though Damien and I dressed differently to each other, we were also different from everybody else, and the music we liked was different from whatever they were listening to, too. Music was one of the only comforts in Damien's world, particularly before meeting Jason. The worst part wasn't the poverty, the heat, the cold, or even the humiliation of living in such circumstances. It was the absolute and utter loneliness, he said. I didn't have a friend in the world. If not for my small battery-powered radio, I would have died inside. My child is here. Hi. Damien dropped out of high school. When his girlfriend broke up with him, he showed up at her door. The girlfriend's mother told police that Damien had threatened the girl. Damien wound up in juvenile hall. Poor, abused, depressed, in trouble with the law. Each of Damien's circumstances alone was enough to raise red flags for adults. However, those red flags indicate a kid who needs help and support, not suspicion, as he earned from one adult who seemed to be paying attention, Juvenile Officer Jerry Driver. Even when Damien did begin to open up, such as when he told a counselor he was interested in nature-based Wicca, adults didn't take what he said at face value. Driver, in particular, claimed repeatedly that Damien was satanic. Damien expressed considerable displeasure with Driver in making such assertions, according to the counselor's notes. Damien acknowledges he is a witch and indicates that this is his religious preference. He also distinguishes his religious beliefs from Satanism and indicated that he believes in a series of gods and goddesses, and he sees this as his religious preference, which should not be of concern to state authorities. Word got out among fellow juvenile inmates where rumors circulated that Damien and his girlfriend planned to conceive a child who would be sacrificed in a satanic ritual. Driver bought the rumor hook, line, and sinker. Months later, when 3 boys were murdered in the night of the full moon, police began working on the theory that the killings were occult-motivated. That got Driver thinking of Damien. Despite the assurances of Damien's doctors that the teen was harmless, Driver continued to dog him. He thought Damien was looking for power, Mara Leverett wrote in The Devil's Knot. He felt that the teenager's unusual appearance, his unconventional religious beliefs, and the satanic rituals that Damien denied, but the Driver was convinced that he had conducted, were the attempts of a social outcast to acquire some form of control. Driver's perception of Damien became crucial, both to the investigation leading to his and Baldwin's arrest in conjunction with the murders, and to the trial that followed. In 1994, when Damien was 19 and Jason was 17, they were found guilty of the murders. Damien was sentenced to death. Jason, along with acquaintance Jesse Miss Kelly, who was also convicted in the case, was sentenced to life in prison. By the end of the trial, Driver wasn't the only one convinced that Damien's different look and tastes indicated something much more sinister than run-of-the-mill teen rebellion. When he was arrested, the newspapers blared headlines such as "One suspect was scary, talked of worshipping the devil," and "Worship of evil debated as motive in killings." Some articles claimed that Damien carried around a cat skull and that Jason was into that devil stuff. Soon the whole community was persuaded that these different-looking boys were evil killers. As it turns out, the media is quite good at circulating such non-truths, particularly where teens are concerned. 5 years later, one of the biggest stories of teen violence would contain so many faulty facts that a whole generation of teens would come under suspicion from the adults they knew and trusted. Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, 2 15-year-old boys with wildly different backgrounds, became friends in suburban Colorado. Neither fit in with the mainstream crowd. Both were skinny, a little gangly, a little awkward. Together they discovered a fondness for violent ideas. They played plenty of rounds of Doom online. Harris even developed modifications for the game, ones that other players could download and use. Within 2 years, however, their activities turned criminal. They broke into a locked van and stole computer equipment, earning them a trip to juvenile hall. Eric showed signs of antisocial personality disorder and was ordered to attend anger management counseling. He began taking an antidepressant, Luvox. Eric and Dylan were released from juvenile hall early for good behavior. They were good at acting polite and charming, which helped obscure the fact that they were experimenting with building pipe bombs and storing the materials in their bedrooms. "I feel like God. I am higher than almost anyone in the fucking world in terms of universal intelligence," Eric wrote in his journal. A little later he asked, "Do you ever wonder why we go to school? It's not too obvious to most of you, but for those who think a little more and deeper, you should realize it's society's way of turning the young people into good little robots." In their senior year, the pair made a video for a school project called Hitmen for Hire. In it, they used fake weapons to shoot students in the hallways on campus. Violent themes also surfaced in their creative writing assignments. The pair began talking about going on a killing spree. A friend over 18 helped them gather weapons, including 2 shotguns, a Tech DC-9 pistol, and a high-point carbine. One April morning, after months of meticulous planning, Eric and Dylan brought their guns and bombs to high school and began shooting. They killed 13 students and teachers and injured 24 others before turning the guns on themselves. In the hours and days after the Columbine High School shootings, reporters flocked to Littleton, Colorado, vying for their chance to tell the story of the great American high school tragedy. Competition was fierce, particularly for any unique angle, source, or nugget of information that would make a news outlet stand out. In the wake of major tragedies, journalists fight to grab and maintain the attention of their audience. Students told reporters that the boys were goths, members of a group called the Trenchcoat Mafia, and fans of Marilyn Manson. Most of these students didn't know the boys personally, but reporters ran with the details, giving readers the impression the cultural influences, not mental health issues coupled with alienation, led these boys to kill. The coverage of the shooting and its aftermath was grotesque, even outrageous. Journalism, including its most serious practitioners, accepted and transmitted the idea that 2 students turned to mass murder because they played nasty computer games associated with the gloomy but nonviolent goths, or had access to internet bomb-making sites, John Katz wrote in Brill's Content. Dumb and demonstrably false as it is, this idea was so widely disseminated and discussed by journalists that most Americans actually came to believe it. CBS 60 Minutes ran a segment called "Are Video Games Turning Kids into Killers?" Time ran photos of the killers while calling them the monsters next door. Hundreds of other articles and news programs ran stories linking computer games, goths, the World Wide Web, to aberrant behavior and even mass murder. The coverage did its job. A week after the Columbine High School shootings, a Gallup poll revealed that more than 80% of Americans thought the internet was at least partly responsible for the incident. Not only is there no evidence that video games, music, goth culture, or the internet cause kids to go on shooting rampages, Eric and Dylan weren't goths and didn't listen to Marilyn Manson, as some sources claimed. How did this story get so far before fact-checking and reason were able to halt it? Reporters from USA Today and the Philadelphia Inquirer were among the first to the scene. They talked to a number of students, including one who called himself Mike Smith, Jessica Siegel wrote in Brill's Content. Smith told them that he was a point guard for the Columbine basketball team and that he knew the killers. He shared vivid stories about how the boys were part of a goth group called the Trenchcoat Mafia. Smith went on to say that school officials had ignored ongoing tensions between the goths and the jocks, who called the boys gays and inbreeds. The Drudge Report and Rivera Live then repeated Smith's quotes. It wasn't until after the earliest reports were published that Richard Jones, a national correspondent for the Philadelphia Inquirer, discovered that Mike Smith did not play point guard for Columbine. In fact, nobody named Mike Smith was enrolled at the high school. It was your worst nightmare, Jones told Siegel. The story had the ring of truth. You don't think someone would lie to get their name in the paper. One of the most error-riddled pieces that aired after the Columbine shootings was a 2020 special focusing on the attacks. During the segment, anchor Diane Sawyer claimed the boys have been part of a dark underground national phenomenon known as the Gothic movement, and some of these goths may have killed before. Sawyer couldn't have got it more wrong. In fact, goths are generally so peaceful that many will not defend themselves even when attacked. Despite the facts, the concept of a dark Gothic influence, or a group with a catchy name like the Trenchcoat Mafia, gave reporters something on which to hang their stories. The Trenchcoat Mafia was mythologized because it was colorful, memorable, and fit the existing myth of the school shooter as an outcast loner, Dave Cullen wrote in Columbine. The Trenchcoat Mafia, snapping and tearing through their high school, hunting down jocks to settle a long-running feud. Almost none of that happened. While most reporters blamed the post-shooting chaos for the inaccuracy of their stories, at least one of the first news outlets to the scene managed to get it right, according to Cullen. The first print story covering the massacre ran in the Rocky Mountain News, and it went to press before Eric and Dylan's bodies were found in the school library. The story was gripping, empathetic, and astonishingly accurate. It nailed the details and the big picture of two ruthless killers picking off students indiscriminately, Cullen wrote. That means it was possible, even in the height of deadline fever, to be faithful to the facts. Many journalists at the scene chose other avenues. Fortunately, at least some reporters appeared to learn from their mistakes. 1 year later, when 13-year-old Mitchell Johnson and 11-year-old Andrew Golden shot 5 people at their middle school in Jonesboro, CNN anchorman Tom Johnson explicitly told reporters not to stake out students' front lawns or force microphones into the faces of grieving families, according to Siegel. Years later, as Cullen and others uncovered Eric and Dylan's journals, it became obvious that mental health issues drove the two to murder. Dylan suffered from depression and identified with characters who seemed on the brink of suicide. Eric showed classic signs of psychopathic behavior, from committing crimes without remorse to hiding his exploits behind a veneer of charisma. But those details were slow to emerge, too slow for the fast competitive pace of the journalism world. The information that is revealed first is often the information that sticks. The world moved on, continuing to believe that goths, games, and Marilyn Manson had something to do with it. Interestingly, there is no profile of an American school shooter. The teens who've committed these crimes had very little in common in terms of cultural influences. Only 25% were interested in violent movies, and less than that played video games, below the average for teenage boys, according to Cullen. The one thing they did have in common is that 98% had suffered a loss or failure they perceived as serious. Taking such failures overly seriously is also a common symptom of depression. However, the media's approach to Columbine, and the misinformation that spread across the nation, launched a wave of discrimination against American teens, particularly those who identified as goths or who played video games such as Doom. In Voices from the Hellmouth, a piece on Slashdot that ran about a week after the shootings, teens chimed in about the sudden distrust and hatred they faced. It was horrible, definitely, emailed Bandy from New York City. I'm a Quake freak. I play it day and night. I'm really into it. I play Doom a lot too, though not so much anymore. I'm up till 3 a.m. every night. I really love it. But after Colorado, things got horrible. People were actually talking to me like I could come in and kill them. It wasn't just like they were really afraid of me. They seemed to think it was okay to hate me even more. People asked me if I had guns at home. This is a whole new level of exclusion, another excuse for the preppies of the universe to put down and isolate people like me. Annika, 78, who lived in suburban Chicago, said she was stopped at the door of her high school because she was wearing a trench coat. I was given a choice. Go home and ditch the coat, or go to the principal. I refused to go home. I have never been a member of any group or trench coat mob or any hate thing, online or any other, so why should they tell me what coat to wear? Other teens, gamers in particular, objected to the media's implication that video games were to blame for Eric and Dylan's killing spree. I sometimes think the games keep me from shooting anybody, not the other way around, said Z. Bird in New Jersey. Something much deeper was wrong with these kids in Colorado. To shoot all those people? Make bombs? You have to be sick, and the question they should be asking isn't what games do they play, but how come all these high-paid administrators, parents, teachers, and so-called professional people, how come none of them noticed how whacked they were? Another gamer, an anonymous Slashdot reader, took the argument even further. These games are not only evil, they're great. Not only not evil, they're great. They're good. They're challenging and stimulating. They help millions of kids who have nowhere else to go. Because the whole world is set up to take care of different kinds of kids. Kids who fit in, who do what they're told, who are popular. I've made more friends online on GameSpot.com than I have in 3 years of high school. While magazines such as Time and Newsweek continued to tout the risks of video games, and scientists hunted for links between gaming and aggressive behavior, some media outlets did what they could to clear up post-Columbine misconceptions. It wasn't enough. In the months and years that followed, teens, boys in particular, were regarded with persistent mistrust. If the message of Columbine was that any boy, at any time, was an unpredictable time bomb waiting to go off, then it made sense to treat all of them as explosive. Unfortunately, nobody thought about what that would do to the boys in question. It's a bad time to be a boy in America. As the new millennium begins, the defining event for boys is the shooting of Columbine High, Christina Hoff Sommers wrote in The War Against Boys. Taking two killers such as Eric and Dylan as representative of the nature of boyhood is both misguided and disrespectful of boys, she said. It has become fashionable to attribute pathology to millions of healthy children. We are turning against boys and forgetting a simple truth, that the energy, competitiveness, and corporal daring of the normal, decent males is responsible for much of what is right in the world, she said. Meanwhile, other authors and supposed experts on teens, such as William Pollock, author of Real Boys and Real Boys' Voices, claimed that the Littleton shooters were the tip of the iceberg, and the iceberg is all boys. And so, within 50 years, adolescents have gone from becoming a newly recognized and occasionally mistrusted segment of the population to being practically the enemy. Pinpointing the causes of teen violence is messy work, fraught with complications such as mental health diagnoses and hard questions about whether parents, teachers, or other mentors may have influenced a wayward teen. As a result, adults often grasp at straws. News article after news article and expert after expert have told parents that a variety of media influences are dangerous for children. They've claimed that these influences simultaneously desensitize children to violence and fill them with such intense emotions that they can't help but act out. Many of these claims are based on correlative data. It's true that many killers listened to heavy metal, or played violent games, or explored an alternative religion. It's true that many teens who commit suicide do these things, or play role-playing games, or participate in goth culture. Far from being the cause of teen violence or self-harm, these influences are most often a form of solace. They provide comfort, a chance for teens to imagine themselves as heroes, an opportunity for adolescents to feel like they have some control over their lives, and a sense of tribe, of belonging, when interests lead adolescents to find others who share those interests. These aspects are powerful enough for everyday kids, but for those who don't fit in, who exist on the margins of society, who have been abused or bullied, they can be a lifeline. Experts have recommended taking these things away from teens. I can't imagine a worse idea. On the contrary, adolescents should be encouraged to explore the media, cultures, and spiritualities that call to them. Parents should absolutely be involved in that process. That's what the Columbine Effect is for. It provides a detailed look at every major teen interest, subculture, and spiritual path that has been condemned by reporters and experts as causing violence or suicide. It reveals where our misconceptions come from and why they're wrong. It also shows why each of these appeals strongly to adolescents and why it's good for them. Fear, including fear of teens themselves, has robbed many parents and teens of the potential to relate to each other, to grow close when things are most difficult. Bonnie, David, and Tara didn't need to suffer such separations from their parents or from the interests that meant so much to them. There are many stories like these. That can change. In Bowling for Columbine, Michael Moore asked Marilyn Manson what he'd say to the kids at Columbine High School or to the people in their community. Manson responded, "I wouldn't say a single word to them. I would listen to what they have to say, and that's what no one did." Kids have been saying for years that they need this music, these games, these faiths, these cultures. It's time we started listening. Thank you.